Good morning. Thank you for joining us. My name is Kate Wallace. I'm the Association Manager for CalSaga. If you're not familiar with the association, I know we've got several people who are joining us that are new to us today. So CalSaga is the California Association of Licensed Security Agencies, Guards, and Associates. So we're the only association in California that specifically represent proprietary security employers, private patrol operators, private security training facilities. And then we do have a fourth designation of membership for, as we call it, associate membership. And that is for companies that provide goods and or services to our other types of membership. So if you're not familiar with CalSaga, welcome. We're glad that you're here. If you are a veteran to our coffee chats, welcome. We're glad that you're here. So today is going to focus on proprietary do's and don'ts. So what I'd like to do very quickly, my name's Kate Wallace. I'm the association manager for CalSaga. So what I'd like to do really quickly is I would like to go over some housekeeping. So during our program today, if you want to keep your microphone, if you want to keep your camera on, you are more than welcome to do that. We do ask that you keep your mic off. But you will see that the chat is open to you. So please feel free. I'll be moderating the chat during the program. So please feel free to ask any questions that you have in the chat. And I know some of you have already submitted questions. So we will do our best to get those answered for you today. So again, just to recap, mic off, camera on or off. That's your choice. So at this time, I'm going to go ahead and turn it over to our moderator. Ashley Cervantes Thomas is one of our two elected vice presidents for this term. She's also the chair of the CalSaga Ambassador Committee, and that's the committee that puts on the coffee chats for the association. So I'm going to go ahead and turn it over to Ashley.
Thank you so much for that introduction, Kate. It is my honor and privilege to moderate these coffee chats with you and explore different topics. I'm really excited for today's topic, but before we dive into that, I do have to introduce my guest speaker today, who is also the CalSaga president, a personal mentor and friend of mine as well, David Chandler. We're very fortunate and honored to have him on our coffee chat. He's come on a time or two. He is the guru who knows all of the things about this year's little magenta. I think we agreed that's the color, the little magenta books. David is just truly a wealth of knowledge. And so we're really excited to have him on today for a really exciting topic. I've sort of dubbed this coffee chat a special edition coffee chat. It was outside of our regularly scheduled program for the year, but we felt that as a committee, my wonderful ambassador committee, some of them are on today, and hopefully they'll say hello in the chat in just a moment. But we really want to talk about proprietary security in California. There's been some changes in the legislation that have affected proprietary. Many of the PPOs who are members of CalSaga, for those of you that are not familiar with that term, private patrol operator is the licensure required to run a private security company in the state of California. And so the majority of the members today of CalSaga are licensed PPOs in the state of California. And so many of those PPOs, we supplement proprietary security. We educate some of you in the proprietary, or air quotes, like in-house security world. And so we feel that this conversation is really timely and important for us to pick David's brain and explain the laws and the lay of the land around proprietary security in California. So that's the goal today. This conversation is being recorded, and the hope is that we can share this with folks in the proprietary world going forward, even those who couldn't be on listening today. And so we're going to aim all of our questions for David towards that end. And I'm really excited for this conversation. Before we dive in, though, I am going to ask Kate to go ahead and launch our polls. I'm curious who is on today. So we have a few different options for you to select from. Which category do you fit in? Are you a registered PSC or proprietary security employer? Are you an in-house security operator or manager? Maybe you're not yet registered with the BSIS, or you don't even know what BSIS is yet. Are you an executive manager or owner curious about transitioning to in-house security or becoming a proprietary security employer? Are you a PPO who maybe supplements proprietary, or are you a PPO who doesn't yet work with any proprietary folks, but you want to learn more about that world? So that's the first question in those options. The next couple questions, I won't read through all of them, but we are curious. For my proprietary folks, we have a few pointed questions for you. If you are not a proprietary operator, you can skip those questions number three and four. But questions number 5 and 6 are for everyone. And so we're curious if you're planning to attend the conference, if you're interested in joining CalSega, if you're not already a member of CalSega. We'll give everybody just a moment to answer those questions. And while we wait for that, if you are Speedy Gonzalez over there and you've already answered all of those poll questions, I'd love for you to take a moment and introduce yourself in the chat. And you can share your name, what company you're with, and maybe what regions you serve. If you're a PPO and if you're proprietary folks, where your company is located would be awesome. So we'll give everybody just a moment for that. And then we'll transition to our exciting questions for Dave. I know he can't wait to jump in and share all of his knowledge about the proprietary world with us. And I am curious, Dave, what we always ask, this is a coffee chat tradition, what are you drinking this morning?
I have, unfortunately, my doctor's not on the call here, but I'm drinking Diet Dr. Pepper.
Diet Dr. Pepper. Is that I feel like you were always a Diet Coke guy.
Right? I like Diet Coke, and then I switch off between this and Diet Dr. Pepper.
I gotcha. I gotcha. Well, that's very exciting. I'm glad your doctor is not here. I won't tell if you don't tell. Shout out to my my ambassador committee co-chair, Shayla, who dropped her information in the chat. Thank you. Kate's Halloween mug is adorable, and we'll have to ask her to share that at some point when she's able to, because she's in the spirit of the season, and I love it. Oh, there it is. Look at that little ghost coffee mug. It is so stinking cute. Kate, I'm curious, where are we at with the poll? Should we give everyone another moment, or does it look like almost everyone has been able to complete those poll questions?
I think let's give 10 more seconds and then I'll share those.
Oh, awesome. That'd be great. Thank you. I am a creature of habit, similar to Dave. I drink pretty much the same thing all the time, and that is my Starbucks peach green tea. It doesn't matter if it's hot or freezing outside. I get the same thing, extra ice. My husband jokes that I might be a serial killer because I would drink ice if there was a snowstorm. I do, in fact, drink ice when there is a snowstorm, actually. I think I bought us 10 more seconds. Kate, what do you think?
I think that's good. I'm going to end the poll and I will share it with all of you.
Okay, this is really exciting stuff. The thing I'm going to pay the most attention to is questions number 1 and 2 for purposes of setting you up, David, for this conversation. So the majority of the folks that are on are PPOs looking to learn a little bit more about the proprietary world. And then the second largest group of folks is those in-house security operators who maybe aren't yet registered with the BSIS, and then some who are already registered with BSIS. I asked the question, number 2, for proprietary folks, has your staff ever been involved in a physical altercation, or have you maybe seen a proprietary security officer have to use force? Because I was really curious about, what exposure to escalation and particularly the reporting requirements that now have been introduced for the proprietary folks and what they're required to report. So we're gonna have a little bit of a conversation about that in a moment, David. One more thing I'd like to bring to your attention, David, and then just for everybody listening in, was question number 3. We asked what was the main reason that they chose the proprietary model. So for those proprietary folks, we were curious, and 100% of them selected all of the above, which was cost savings, quality control, and then insurance and liability concerns. So some of my questions for David are going to address just that, and we can expand on that a little bit more. So with that, I'm going to go ahead and transition us to our first question. David, are you ready?
I am ready. Now, I want to just make a quick statement. I don't know everything, okay? I am pretty knowledgeable. I'm going to share what I do know. If you want to stump me and come up with a question I haven't heard before, and it seems like I'm struggling, I'm probably going to try to find out who you are, or ask Kate to find out who you are, do the research and get back to you. So that's number one. I don't know everything, but I'm going to try my best. So we're here to help you.
Well, I love that, David, and I would be shocked if someone can stump you. I might even give him a Starbucks gift card because I've yet to see that happen, but we'll find out. So, question number 1 is actually I want to make sure that we're all on the same page. So I want to go over the technical terms, and David, correct me if I'm wrong. I have my pen and I'm ready to take notes because I learned something new from David every time that man opens his mouth. So the first term, proprietary security employer, PSE, as defined by the BSIS. Can you just explain, you probably have it memorized, but like where in the B&P code does it address what a proprietary security employer, or can you kind of give us that summary off the top of your head?
So just like let me back up for a second. Just give you an outlook of what California has. We approximately have 347,000 licensed security guards in California. Those are licensed security guards. We have approximately 300,000 unlicensed security guards in California. And a lot of those are the proprietary officers who don't think that they have to be registered by the Bureau or even registered by an employer. And a lot of those things are nightclubs, bars, where they serve food and they have a nightclub feature to them. And that would be bouncers, stuff like that. Then you have some bars that use bar backs as security, but either way, there's the same amount of unlicensed guards almost as there are licensed guards in California. So that's number one. For a proprietary, the state of California determined that they have to try to regulate the security industry. Now, back in the day, and I'll say back in the day when I was younger, the in-house guards were considered proprietary. Now, proprietary is where you have an employer-employee relationship. So, for example, and just picking them out of the blue, Target. Target is an employer, and they hired direct security officers to work for them. They usually call them loss prevention, asset protection, a bunch of different names that they use for Target. But these officers over the years have gotten into a lot of situations. There's been lawsuits. Target has had lawsuits for their officers using physical means to detain somebody against their will. And there's also a section in the penal code that talks about the merchant's privilege rule, or the old shopkeeper's privilege rule, which was written back in the 30s, that allows you to detain somebody against your will while you're working for a retail employee or employer. So the in-house guards, the state of California came up with proprietary private security officer and proprietary private security employer. So unlike a PPO, and if you wanted to get a PPO license, you have to apply as either a sole proprietor, a partnership, or a corporation. They don't accept LLCs. So you apply to get a PPO, you have to have a qualified manager. Unlike the proprietary, you can apply to be the employer, and you just have to have somebody who's responsible for the registration. So they, even though the state considers it to be a manager, it's not a qualified manager, which the difference there is there's no test. There's also, at this time, which is going to change, there's no fingerprint or background necessary for the proprietary private security employer. There is for the guard, but not for the employer himself, just the guard himself. Because at the time, the state figures, well, he's an employee of the employer, and the employer should, or whether it's the same person as the owner of the business, they should know who they're hiring. They should do their own background checks before they hire anybody. But before you went out and hired an additional guard specifically to provide the functions and duties of a security officer, the state of California wants those people background checked. Does that make sense?
Absolutely. So to
Okay.
recap, there's kind of three terms, and I'm going to drop it in the chat just for everyone following along that might be newer to some of these terms. Proprietary security employer, or PSE, is defined by the BSIS. It requires someone who's responsible for the registration, but not necessarily a qualified manager. And at this time, there's no fingerprint background check required for that PSE registration. And I do want to be really clear with everyone, it is a registration, not a licensure. So it's a little bit different by the letter of the law, if you will. The next term that David used was proprietary security officer, or PSO, which is a licensed security officer who may be employed by a PSC or proprietary security employer. All of that is outlined in the BMP code by BSIS. And then the third term we're going to use is when we refer to in-house security, we're just talking today about folks who maybe don't yet have a BSIS registration. They haven't registered. Maybe those bars or nightclubs that are using those bouncers or barbacks as security, but they don't have any idea what the BSIS is yet, and they aren't registered just yet. So if I recap that, okay, David, we can move on to the next.
Absolutely.
Fun question. Okay. So as a committee, my ambassador committee, for those of you that don't know, helps me put together these coffee chat questions, and then we bring on folks to talk about different topics and whatnot. And so the first thing my committee really wanted to make sure we clarify for folks listening in, the basics. So bringing it back all the way to the ABCs, David, what are the requirements of registering with the BSIS for a proprietary security employer? So you talked about the fact that there is no background check, there's no qualified manager. But what about if it's a large chain? So we'll go with the Target example. Does every Target store in that example require their own registration with the BSS, or do you know how that works?
So at this time, no. So like with the large chains like Target, they just have to have one license, and it licenses them throughout the entire state. So one license is held by Target, and they have individual proprietary. It's PPSO, Proprietary Private Security Officer, not just
Got it.
PSO.
Okay.
However, it's just a name. But then they have to be registered to the actual license itself. Then somebody has to manage it in a perfect world. Now, remember in the PPSO thing, and I know it's probably not a question yet, but as a proprietary private security officer, you are only allowed to work for a proprietary private security employer.
Mhm.
However, the proprietary private security employer, I'm going to get messed up. This is Peter Piper picked a peck of pickled peppers. He is allowed to work directly for an employee, or the employer can hire a person with a guard card.
Yes.
They can a person that holds a California guard card can work for a proprietary officer, but a proprietary officer cannot work for a PPO or a contract company. Does that make
Okay.
sense?
Yeah.
And the one other caveat to that is there's less training required for the proprietary private security officer. They only have to do 16 hours of training versus a guard card is 40 hours of training. However, here's the backdoor audit section. If you employ a security guard with a security guard card, you, the employer, must maintain his guard card records as if you were a PPO. He has to have the 40 hours. He has to have continual education, 8 hours every year, versus the 4 hours of proprietary. So make sure that you've got copies of all their certificates and have a training file available for the Bureau.
That's actually a really good point. So I did not realize that that was a requirement of our, now I'm gonna mess it up, proprietary security employers. So if those PSCs employ somebody with a guard card, they're required to keep the training file and all of the records just like a PPO does. That's really helpful to know. For the PPSOs, those proprietary private security officers, they do the initial 16 hours and then 4 hours annually. Is that correct?
I believe so, yes. Now the
Okay.
law is changing. I mean,
Oh,
it's changing. It might change this year. I don't think it's going to, but they do have a cleanup bill that they're trying to push through, and I haven't read it yet. I'm not sure it'll be this year though. So, but with the Bureau, it changes so fast, and even the magenta book that Ashley refers to, they didn't even print some of the stuff that came out this year. They didn't have it at the printer soon enough. So we have to go back and forth to the other California Code of Regulations and go back and forth, and it's really a nightmare.
yeah,
But
absolutely.
laws change, the more training you have, the better off you are.
Absolutely. That makes sense to me. Now, speaking of the training, where can an individual, if they go to Target and they say, "Hey, Target, I want a job. I want to work for you as a PPSO." Where do they go about getting that training? Can Target provide that training? Do they need to go to a
Absolutely.
security school?
No, they can go to a training facility as
Okay.
long as the training facility is licensed to teach proprietary classes. It's a different license than it would be to teach a security guard card. So
Okay.
you have to have a proprietary license in order to teach that. Or the proprietary private security employer usually is authorized to teach it also.
Okay. That makes sense. And then I think that covers everything on the training front. Well, except I guess that begs the question, are PSEs then also required to keep those training records for those
Absolutely.
PPSs? Okay. Okay.
Absolutely.
So if I am XYZ grocery store and I go register as a PSE and I go out and I hire my own PPSOs, BSIS can come in and audit me for those training records. So I need to have a separate training file for each one, and I need to demonstrate how I'm providing that ongoing training and what that looks like. So that's,
Right.
I think, a really helpful tip for folks who maybe aren't familiar with how the BSIS works with regards to training records. My next question in that same vein, just kind of the basics. Are there any that you're aware of, David, limitations around company structures? Like you mentioned, PPOs can only be a sole proprietor or a corporation. Are there any similar restrictions for proprietary security employers with regards to their company structures?
At this time, there's not. But
Okay.
in a perfect world, the Bureau would like to bring them online and do exactly the same thing they're doing with the PPOs. They just
Got
want to
it.
make it simple. And the reason for that is like an LLC is a limited liability company, limited liability corporation. You're only limited to the amount of money that you invested in it. And the Bureau's position is they want $1 million insurance for anybody acting like a PPO or PPSO that can withstand a lawsuit based on the security component of it. So the reason they say uh, no LLCs for PPOs is they want to make sure that there's money to pay an individual. And if you are only limited to liability, if you're only limited to the amount of money you invested, if you only invested $1,000 or let's say $5,000, that's all
Yeah,
you're responsible for. So that's
got
why
it.
they can allow the LLCs. And they're trying to do the same thing for the business owners also, because the business owners are in the same position we're in as far as PPOs go, because they're not exempt from any civil liability or litigation. So, rather than take down the whole business, they'd like a separate, in a perfect world, the Bureau would like a separate insurance policy, but it's not enforceable at this time.
Got it. Okay. Well, that's going to come up in a later question too. So I'm
Yep.
glad we already started tackling that because this is a whole new world for me as well. So there are at least a handful of folks listening in today who are just beginning their journey to becoming, proprietary security employers. What are some considerations that they should make? For example, David, am I going to have, when they're kind of assessing what their goals are, what kinds of questions should they be asking themselves? One of the samples I came up with was, am I going to have security personnel versus ambassadors versus customer service representatives? Like, really, what are some questions maybe that would be helpful for folks who are just getting started on this journey?
Well, on the proprietary side, we can talk about law all day long and what is the definition of a security officer versus a proprietary security officer. And then at the end of the day, no matter what happens after the smoke clears, there's civil liability and there's risk. So, when you when you go to a jury trial in a civil lawsuit, you only have to have 2/3 of the jury vote with you. It doesn't have to be unanimous like a criminal jury. However, you have to convince 12 members of the jury, or at least 8 out of the 12, that you're not performing the functions and duties of a security officer when they think you might be. So, for example, specifically for proprietary, two things have to happen. Number one, they have to be in a distinctive uniform marked as security, and they must have interaction with the public. That's the two requirements for proprietary. So let's talk about a bouncer for a second. Is he in a distinctive uniform? If he's working as a bouncer at a nightclub, is a suit a distinctive uniform? Do other patrons that come in wear suits? Do bartenders, do they wear suits? Is it a distinguishable uniform? Then, if they're acting as a bouncer at the front checking IDs and such, what are they doing? Are they protecting the people and the property that they're there? Are they preventing anybody from just walking in? Are they collecting a fee for people coming in? Could they be stopping the potential embezzlement of somebody not paying their fee and not letting them in? So are they providing the functions and duties of a security officer? So even though the law is clear, in order to be a proprietary officer, those two conditions must exist. But what is a member of the public going to say? Or what are 12 members of the public going to say? And can you convince them that your bouncer is not acting as a security officer? And that's where a lot of people lose. And sadly, in criminal liability, it's usually only dollars. I'm going to say $10,000 fine, $15,000 fine, $20,000 fine. But when you go to court on a civil litigation, now we're in nobody starts off at $100 in a civil litigation. They want to start off at let's see what sounds good to me. Let's start off with $1 million. I'm going to sue you for $1 million. Well, 20 years ago, $1 million was a lot of money. Today, not sure $1 million is going to take you till the end of your time. So let's go for $2, $3, or $5 million and see if we can prove it. Because it doesn't really matter the dollar amount you put on it. You're ultimately going to probably settle for something less. But as a business owner, you got to remember too that if you violate the Business and Professions Code or violate the Penal Code, you have violated a public law, and no insurance company will indemnify you for violation of a public law. So who's going to pay for this fine? It's not going to be the insurance company if they can get out of it, if they can prove that you violated the law. You, as the owner of the business, are going to pay for it. And if I had a business, I'm not going to explain to my wife that we no longer live in this beautiful house we live in. We're moving to a cardboard shack down on Broadway Street in downtown Los Angeles. That's not going to go over well for me. But you have to remember it's risk. A lot of part of the security industry is risk. And how much risk are you willing to take or willing to accept? And this is a very important point that you have to really think about in the proprietary side versus hiring a private security company to come in and do the same job. Dollar for dollar, are you paying the same amount of money because you've got benefits you've got to worry about, you've got vacation time, you've got sick time, all these other things come into play. The really only advantage that you have in the proprietary side versus a security officer, a private, see, I'm getting mixed up now. private patrol operator side is you wouldn't have to pay weekly. You could pay bi-monthly. That's pretty much the only advantage of being an in-house or proprietary security company. You continue on your pay. If you're PPO, you have to pay weekly. And that would disrupt, if you're owning a bar or business, that would disrupt your pay period, unless you paid weekly anyhow.
Yeah. And actually that's I'm glad that you mentioned that, because that was on this list. Like when it comes to considerations, if you are the owner of XYZ grocery store or XYZ bar and nightclub, these are some of the considerations to make. And I think, David, you make a really important point that the number one consideration, it really comes down to risk, I think, is probably going to be the biggest conversation you need to have with yourself or your other business partners or upper management when you're making these types of considerations. Is there anything else that sort of stands out to you from the HR perspective, David, when it comes to managing an in-house or proprietary operation from an HR front? And again, I know you're not an attorney, you're not an HR
Right.
consultant, but I'm just curious, does anything else stick out to you that those HR managers who may very well be listening in today for those in-house operations maybe should consider that's a little different from your other day-to-day HR responsibilities?
Well, the biggest thing, and I do this a lot of times when I go out and speak to people. I ask groups of people if they have a California driver's license, and 90% of them raise their hand. They do, because most of them are from California. And I ask them the same question. I said, "Well, then answer a question for me. What is 10851 of the California Vehicle Code?" Does anybody know what 10851 of the California Vehicle Code is? And normally nobody does. I said, well, when you got your driver's license, you signed a piece of paper the first time you got your license that you promised to follow all the laws, rules, and regulations of the state of California. Yet you don't know what those laws are. You get in the car, it starts for you, you're on your way, vroom, going to the next space. But in the proprietary world and in the PPO world, it really behooves you to understand what the laws are. And they're a little convoluted. And that's why we try to cover it with CalSaga to make sure everybody understands what you have to do or what you need to do. And if you're willing to take the risk, I personally, I'm fine with it. I have no problem with it, but it's not my lawsuit, you know? And at some point, if you do get in a lawsuit, who made the risk? Who took the risk? Who assumed the risk? Did the owner assume the risk? Did the HR person assume the risk? And if there's a multi-million-dollar lawsuit to be paid out, and I was the HR director and I made the call, maybe I'm not the HR director anymore. I don't know what's going to happen. But I mean, that's something to keep in mind. I mean, if the owner accepts the risk, have a great time, enjoy yourself. But be careful. We have a tremendous amount of attorneys in California that are looking for extra money and how to make extra money. The opportunities are tremendous.
Yeah, gas is expensive in California. Okay, so we've covered some specifics. I am curious, uh, talking from a very practical perspective, what are some general, and you're not an insurance broker either,
Right.
David, but what are some general insurance overviews? If risk is the biggest concern, typically we meet risk with insurance. So right now, my understanding is there is no specific insurance threshold or requirement for proprietary employers the way that there is for private patrol operators. Is that correct?
At this time, no, but there will
Okay.
be.
Okay, yeah, they're coming down the pipe.
Oh,
So
no,
again, that all comes back to the entity structures, right? So those LLCs make it a little bit challenging for those insurance thresholds. I understand that. So are there any specific insurance tips or pointers that you could give to somebody who's just starting this journey into the
Absolutely.
proprietary world?
Absolutely. Number one and foremost, be honest with your broker. Tell them what your plans are, what you want to do. Now, I pay a couple different insurance companies a lot of money to protect me because I'm out there doing a lot of stuff. But I've known a lot of businesses that have they'll ask me Do I have to have extra insurance? If you, well, let's just take the bar, for example. If you have a bar, you have to have X amount of dollars insurance. I don't know what the law requires, but I know that there's been bars in California that the bouncers, a few years ago, this came up in San Diego, where a bouncer had ejected somebody from the nightclub, and subsequently he threw him out of the property, and he hit his head, and the individual passed away. I'm sure there was a lawsuit from the family, and how much can your insurance policy stand to have a lawsuit for a wrongful death? I don't know. But would that put your business out of business versus a standalone policy for the security people themselves? That might be in a better position for you. Does it cost more money? Absolutely. Does it come out of your profit? Absolutely. But again, at the end of the day, if you have no business, you have no profit. So you have to keep that in mind. But remember in California, battery is as simple as an unwanted touch. That's battery in California. It's as simple as an unwanted touch. If your bouncers or your proprietary private security officers are touching people, is that a use of force? I don't go around touching many people that I don't know unless there's a reason for it. And so, what would 12 members of a jury think it would be? Chances are it would be a use of force. So again, lawsuits are coming. They're starting to roll up. I always tell people with legislation comes litigation. When there's new legislation, the people figure it out within a couple of years. There's some new laws. You violate the laws, and we're going to expose you for that violation. But let's go back to the proprietary for a second, or more into proprietary. Say that you own a football stadium or a stadium that has football, and this happens a lot. You don't want to hire a bunch of security guards to be ushers, so you hire people just to be ushers, and you call them ushers. So what does an usher do? An usher will tell you, if you come into their area, they'd like to see your ticket for where your seat is. Now, if you bought a $10, I'm going to call it, and please, no offense to anybody that owns a stadium, if you have a nosebleed seat, that means you're usually up higher in the arena than a 50-yard line seat. So if you pay $10 for a ticket for a seat way up at the nosebleed section, why couldn't you sit down at the 50-yard line? So you take your ticket and you go down to the 50-yard line, and the usher is there to tell you, I'm sorry, but your ticket is for the nosebleed section. And this is for proprietary and PPOs, doesn't matter. Would the usher allow you to sit in the 50-yard line seat? No. Why? Because we know that 50-yard line seat is probably a $500 ticket. So is the usher preventing the embezzlement of the ticket from a $10 ticket to a $500 ticket, and potentially not allowing the owner of the facility to get the amount of money out of that $500 seat that he has? The general answer is usually absolutely. Well, then the usher is actually providing the functions and duties of a security guard, because one of the jobs is to prevent the embezzling of your employer. It's pretty clear. Same thing in a movie theater. And I know this question comes up a lot. You go into a movie theater, you have a ticket in your hand, somebody is going to check your ticket. Does that mean you can't bounce from theater to theater to theater? Allegedly, you bought one ticket for one movie. So is that guard or is that ticket taker actually performing the functions and duties of a security officer? Depends on the attorney, right? And then again, it's open to 12 members of a jury how they're going to rule
Yeah.
at the
Well,
end of the day.
speaking of attorneys, none of us are attorneys, neither
No,
do try. And if you're in need, CalSega does have a phenomenal legal partner in Bradley Gamillick and Wellerstein. But on a very high level, David, let's come back to the use of force expectations and requirements. So for proprietary folks, you did a great job of kind of outlining, battery in California really is as simple as an unwanted touch. And that lends itself to use of force conversations, we'll say. So, talk to me about what use of force requirements there are for proprietary folks in California.
Well, I don't know if I want to say the word fortunately, but either way, what happened with use of force, if you've gone over the new use of force policy with the powers to arrest and appropriate use of force, this all stemmed from an incident that happened back east, and it's come up to California now, and the legislature feels that they want to keep track of the use of force by security officers because it's never been tracked before. The POST, which is Peace Officer Standards and Training, monitors all use of force cases regarding law enforcement. They monitor them, they count them, they put them in different categories. And the bureau chief was asked at a Senate hearing, how many use of force incidents have there been in the security industry? And the chief said publicly that the bureau doesn't count them. The bureau does not keep track, and they've never required them to keep track. That's why the bureau added a year ago, any use of force against a member of the public while on duty has to be reported to the bureau. It's a $5,000 fine if you don't report it to the bureau within 7 business days. You also can lose your license can be suspended for not reporting, and the bureau can also revoke your license as proprietary or as a PPO, as a private patrol operator. So the bureau now, because they got embarrassed at the Senate level, has come up with they're going to track the use of force. Now, when it first came into play, there was a big calling for hospital security. So if you provide security at a hospital, there were a lot of times when people were mentally incapable of controlling themselves, and the hospital uses a code calling it 5150 versus 5050. You're a little bit off. They would constantly call in security to come into the unit and help restrain the individual and keep him from hurting himself or anybody else. So CalSaga was very helpful and got that exempt so that you don't have to report those, because those were happening every single day at hospitals throughout California. So at the time, the first year that we went on, there were security companies that were turning in about approximately 1,000 reports a month from hospitals throughout California of use of force, and then that got exempted for hospitals. So that's an exemption. But the Bureau doesn't really want to exempt anything else because they don't feel that it's necessary. So any use of force, the Bureau must be notified within 7 business days, proprietary or PPO.
Yeah, I think that's a really, really important sticking point because a lot of folks in the proprietary world maybe don't have that exposure. And there are some hospitals that have proprietary security staff that, that exemption that CalSega fought for was very helpful to them as well. So, I mean, I'd love to have those conversations with folks in the proprietary world at all different in all different industries and all different levels. I think it's a really important conversation for them to be a part of, because maybe there are more examples of things that CalSega can advocate for proprietary folks if we had if we were having that dialogue together. So I'll never forget the executive of one of the largest security companies in the world, and he had quite a few hospitals in his portfolio. And one day I was on a Zoom call with him, and in the background was a stack. I mean, it was this high, and it was all of the different hospital specific use of force incident reports. And I remember he was like, "Yeah, that was in a month," and it was absurd. So I think those are really important conversations for us in this industry, whether we're proprietary or PPOs, to be having. So okay, let's pretend that I'm with XYZ organization, and I have made the decision to conduct, I want to have our own in-house, if you will, security. And I've made the decision to become a registered PSC with the state of California. And the next conversation I need to have is if I want to supplement my PPSOs, the proprietary private security officers that I'm hiring, with private patrol operators, with contract security. So, David, what are some considerations that we might want to have for folks that decide maybe they're leaning towards supplementing with the contract security or with a licensed PPO in the state of California? What are some maybe joint employer notes or things that would be helpful to consider in that scenario?
So if you're going to contract out with the PPO and have them supplement your security, no matter what the situation is, you want to make sure that you have a good, solid contract with a good addendum that it talks about exactly what your expectations of the PPO are. What do you expect them to do? And lay it all out what your expectations are. Because you do get into some issues where the proprietary side is going to try to give direction to the PPO side. And that's where you get into dual employer issues. And who's actually the boss? Who's who in the zoo, right? Who's giving you directions? So it really has to be nailed out in that contract or addendum to the contract, letting them know what their responsibilities are and what's to be expected from them. You really have to put the time in that to do it, to have any other scenarios you have come up. Because remember, if you're a proprietary working at a retail establishment, do you expect the PPO, if you contract them to work the parking lot, to assist you in making arrests, to try to detain somebody against their will? There's real gray areas there of who can do what. Remember, in order to arrest somebody for a misdemeanor, two conditions must exist. The crime must have been attempted or committed, and it must have been in your presence. Law enforcement has the same threshold. So if you ask the PPO to get involved in an arrest, is he assisting your officer who's actually making the arrest, or does the PPO take on some liability because they feel that he's making the arrest? So there's a real gray area in the law, and you just have to make sure you dial it all out in the beginning as best you can.
I think that's a really helpful summary. I think my notes, when we were putting these questions together, it really comes down to control and then responsibility. I'm curious, is there any scenario that you can think of that might be a good example for folks to kind of bring that to light? When my ambassador committee was talking, we had one member of the committee mention that he does quite a bit of supplemental work for a few large arenas. And so, he was sort of describing like the arenas have their in-house staff or their PPSOs, and then his officers kind of man the parking lot. So similar to what you were sort of describing, David, where maybe the PPO licensed security officers are out in the parking lot and then they're responding to something. So in that scenario where maybe they radio down, the PPSO says like, hey, I just saw this person do this thing. Can you make sure to stop them in the parking lot? To now the contracted security officer, kind of walk me through that scenario and how that should look versus how maybe sometimes it does look.
Well, it happens all the time. So what it would be a retail establishment where the inside or the in-house guard, proprietary guard, would notify the guard, the PPO company in the parking lot, maybe just doing parking lot patrol. Hey, there's a guy wearing a blue shirt walking out the door in about 30 seconds. I'm trying to get there as quick as I can. Can you stop him before he gets too far? The problem with that is, did you get the right guy? Is there more than one person wearing a blue shirt? Is this the correct person you're detaining? In the PPO world, private patrol operator world, we cannot detain somebody against their will. And our employment contract comes down to, or in the contract, it's in the contract whether it comes down, can we detain somebody against their will, acting a contractor to the retail establishment. So we have to be very, at this point, I would say talk to your attorney because you're going to get named in a lawsuit anyhow. Somebody's going to sue you and
Yep.
everybody's going to be named in a lawsuit. So
Yeah.
again, risk. Is it worth the risk?
Yeah.
And do you have insurance to cover making arrests? If you start making arrests, there's some security companies that don't even make arrests. They just observe and report. That's their second function.
Yeah.
So very, very, very tough section to be in.
Yeah, absolutely. I just wanted to walk through that scenario that I felt like
Oh,
might be
yeah.
helpful. So I appreciate that. David does have a hard stop, so I want to be respectful of his time. I have two quick questions left for you, David. For those who are just considering starting this journey into proprietary security employership, is there, and you've sort of mentioned a few things, but can you kind of summarize for us? Is there any reason maybe you would advise not going the route of being a proprietary employer if they're just starting this journey?
The, the best advice I would be able to give you is this. If you're considering going proprietary or starting a proprietary service versus a PPO service, again, the liability. That's what's most important over everything, the risk that you're taking. With a private patrol operator providing the security, you have some indemnification that they'll accept a lot of the risk for the training to make sure the officer's doing what it's supposed to, uniforms, all those type of things. In a perfect world, are you going to be named in the lawsuit also? Absolutely. But if you can switch some of your risk to the other company to accept risk, if the guard did something egregious, then it would lessen your liability. That's about the biggest, dollar for dollar, you're going to be paying the same amount of money, if not maybe a little less for the private patrol operator versus taking them in-house. Because in the event your in-house guard gets hurt, you've got disability issues, unemployment issues, all these other things that the PPO accepts. So I'd really, the first and foremost, and I know Kate's going to say it at the end of the day if Ashley doesn't say it first, we always suggest you come to one of our university classes or come to our conference to learn more information because we're always putting out information. Treat your proprietary guys as if you were a PPO. It can't
Yeah,
hurt you to be over and above what you should have. Doesn't hurt at
absolutely.
all. And again, it looks better when you're presenting it to the jury or when your attorney is.
Yeah,
Nothing is cheap in this world. You all have to pay for attorneys, proprietary versus PPOs. Somebody's been paying for the attorney at some point or another, and good attorneys aren't inexpensive. So contracts, go over them real well. Make sure you're covering everything you want to cover. Reduce reduce the risk that you're going to take and look at the big picture. Is there controls that you can have hiring a PPO? Absolutely. You can put in there, I want to interview every PPO that works on our, or every officer that works on our property and approve them to work on our property. So it still gives you control over who's working there and the ability to release them back to the PPO and request another person. Hard to do that if you have a proprietary company. You hire somebody, you don't like them after a week, and now you got to get rid of them. Then you have other employment issues.
yeah.
That
I think
help?
that's a great summary. So my final question for you, David, in a minute or less, what are the benefits of joining CalSega as a proprietary security employer?
The best reason to join is knowledge. We are going to educate you whether you like it or not. We're going to keep you posted what's happening, and you have a voice. I talk to proprietary people, I talk to PPOs, I talk to attorneys, I talk to people all day long about what's happening in their industry. I would love to have more proprietary people be more involved. Hey, this is what we need to lean towards. This is what the Bureau's trying to do. How can we counter that? What would be a great what would be a give and take? What can the industry give versus what can the industry take? Otherwise, the Bureau is just going to make up what they think is the right thing and talk to one or two people, and that's it. I invite everybody to let me know their opinions. You can email me, you can call me. I keep an open mind, and I don't know everything, but I need help. I need help understanding some things. I need people I can call and say, hey, this is what's happening. What do you think? And that's why we have the ambassador committees. That's why we have other committees and stuff at CalSAGA that we can pull from your knowledge also. So the biggest thing that we can help you with is knowledge, information, what's happening, what's about to happen, and what can we prevent happening to hurt our industry.
This is not a paid advertisement for Bradley Gamelik and Willerstein, but we talk about attorneys. They also give a really nice discount. I'm sure they would apply the discount for proprietary folks as well for CalSAGA members. So, for anybody who's already feeling like they've got a headache coming on from all the knowledge that was just imparted on you in the last hour. David, I cannot thank you enough. David and I did a prep call for this, and you guys, look at all these notes I took. I told you, every time that man opens his mouth, I learned something new. So hopefully you all got a lot out of it. David, I know you have to hop off. I am going to turn it back over to Kate in just a moment to do some housekeeping wrap up things. If those of you that are on have not yet registered for the conference, I will be, a giant megaphone for it. It is such a great networking and learning opportunity. And one of the benefits I can't believe David didn't mention, this is the first time he's not mentioned it, is there's crab on a stick. Oh,
No, it's
Uh-oh.
lobster on a stick.
Lobster, sorry, David.
Anybody can get crab, actually. No, we have
Um,
lobster on a stick.
David makes sure to feed us really well at all of the events, whether it's a security university, which is done twice a year, once in Southern California, once in Northern California, and then the big main event, which is where the, lobster on a stick is served. You can, if nothing else, you're going to get a giant shot of depresso with all the knowledge you're going to give, and you're going to be fed well. Nobody leaves that conference hungry. Once again, David, thank you so much. I really appreciate your time. Thank you everyone for joining us for this special edition coffee chat.